Welcome back, Janet. It's super exciting to have you on the show. I am excited that you're here, and we have a really kind of heavy topic to talk about today, but I think it's going to be fun to touch on. And so if you could just share with everybody what you do and who you are and why you're so passionate about this work.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me today. My name is Janet Price. I'm a co-parenting and divorce coach. And I'm not sure that people naturally just get into this. And so my why is a culmination of my life story. So essentially, I am a child product of divorce. My parents divorced in sixth grade, and it became pretty high conflict and confrontational, in which I felt very pulled between both of my parents. And even though the story I told myself when I was in sixth grade and going all the way through middle school to high school was, I know exactly why my parents got divorced, and I didn't have any questions in my head. And so I moved on and went to college and thought I was healed, and the divorce didn't impact me. And it turns out subconsciously it impacted me way more than I ever knew, based on being so pulled and feeling split in my personality. So fast forward in college, I met my first husband. He felt very comfortable to me for some way, and we began a really lovely life together. And then he was working as a professional after grad school. I was working as a professional after grad school, and we had this really wonderful life. And then we decided to have children, and so my first son was born, and then 23 months later, my second son was born. And that's when the dynamics of our communication started to really struggle. And we ended up divorcing. The divorce in our situation started repeating what had happened in my parents' divorce, and try as I might to keep my children away from the feeling that I had felt as a child. I was at our co-parenting relationship escalated over a 10-year period, to the point where Department of Child Services was called in a total of 5 times. We were back in court a total of 5 times. And at the end, my children were forced to hide their love or how they felt for me, and eventually falsely accused me of things that you just could never imagine. And our relationship was ended through the court system for a total of 5 years.
Wow.
After 5 years, my children and I have developed a new relationship where we have a very loving communication that is on our terms. So that's my why. I saw in that time period of the 10 years that my childhood past, and the reason my first husband felt so comfortable is because I was trying to re-heal the wounds I had from my childhood. Mm-hmm. So I found somebody who had similar background and past and acted in a similar way that internally, without me knowing, I wanted to fix my childhood. And so that's the path that I repeated.
That's so interesting. So you were basically seeking this person out to heal what happened in your childhood. That's what I'm hearing, right?
That's exactly right.
So wait, let me ask you a question. How did those wounds feel like they got filled as a result of seeking that person out, or did they grow larger?
So what's very interesting, right? That was all subconscious. And I didn't put all this together until, many years into our high conflict co-parenting situation at the very tail end, when I was enough removed to reflect back and see the patterns that when you're in it, it's very hard to see.
Yeah.
So it was not top of my mind or conscious whatsoever. And so I mean, there's lots of therapeutic stories that say 90% of any relationship problem are problems that happened in your, no matter what, are problems that occurred in your childhood. And this person you gravitate to them to try again, to try to fix it, to go again and to not have it be a problem. So in your conscious mind, you're not sure why, and you're trying to solve a problem in the moment, but it's to make your childhood problem be fixed and whole. And that's sort of what, yes.
That's very interesting. And see, I'm curious, in your growing up, was there like discord in your family? Like, was there divorce, or was there, struggles within, what you saw in childhood?
Right. So my parents' divorce. So it was very easy in my mind. My parents were consciously in my mind. My parents had been married for 18 years. My mom said my dad was an alcoholic. My mom said she had asked him, they've gone to therapy, all these things, and it's not working. So divorce had to happen. That seems very black and white.
Yeah, it
right?
seems like it.
So in my conscious mind, that's sort of why I was walking on the path of, oh yeah, okay, this makes sense. I love my dad. I love my mom. My mom can't be with my dad, right? It made sense. However, what I wasn't realizing, the subsurface of what was going on, is my mom never healed from that wound. So it wasn't so clear in her mind. And so she put herself in a very victim space. And so unconsciously, she was talking to, I have a younger sister, to us about, your dad came over and drowned the dog. You're not allowed to. So it became this constant little thing that was in the back of my mind all the time. And not to mention, she and I did not relate to each other in a very good manner. And her own personality, my personality conflicted a lot. So I asked to go live with my dad several times, and that did not occur. And when I went away to college, I never came home. So essentially, I rejected my relationship with my parents because of the pull and because of the noise that was going on. To answer your question. So that's the discord that was going, that's what my experience in my childhood was.
Wow. Okay. That's interesting. And so you kind of saw some of the stuff that you're trying to correct now for other people, as far as how, the things that you can say about your former significant other can affect the children. And it's interesting that, it sounded very easy, but then when you think about how it actually affected you over time, it's not very easy, right? Wow. It's not very easy at all. And so fast forward, right, when my first husband felt very comfortable, there were two parts. Both unconsciously, what I was not aware of this, but one was the manner that he related to me was very similar to, not the victim state of my mother in that way, but in how he spoke his needs and what he wanted. That relationship, his personality was more like my mother in that way. So even though I had rejected my mother, right? Yeah.
It felt comfortable. So that's where I went. Now, what I knew intentionally was he had a full, huge, intact family. And so that was part of me going, oh, look at this family all working together, like extended family and everything. So that was part of it. What I didn't look under the surface of that, which I knew consciously but didn't put it together, is within that family, there was a lot of discord going on in his family, in his experience in his life as well.
That's interesting. I have to highlight this because it seems like, everybody always thinks that they are the only ones, and we all, it seems like, have very similar stories of not working through some of our childhood trauma and not realizing how that manifests later on. Wow.
It's so important to be able to work through, and sometimes you don't understand or know about that.
Yes.
And I don't say, I don't look at that experience as from my childhood as trauma. In my own world, I look at as sort of, I just consciously wasn't getting the love that I needed as a child for me. And I ended up trying to build the relationships and get the love in my first relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then when that didn't work out because I didn't learn how to communicate and all those sorts of things, co-parenting with this individual ended up me continually trying to communicate in a broken down communication of why we got divorced, right?
That makes sense. Yeah.
That kept escalating and escalating.
That makes a lot of sense. Wow. So let's talk a little bit about kind of what that, like not having a proper co-parenting situation can do to a child that's involved, right?
Right. So let's just start with co-parenting. That word sort of is in a huge umbrella for most people to understand.
Let's go.
That it means you have two parents, right? And people can be really wonderful and loving towards and really, come to compromise and really think about the children from the children's perspective. And then you can have the very high conflict, which is the experience, in my own relationship, in my own co-parenting. And so co-parenting is the umbrella. Then there's other words talking about how you co-parent.
Oh, okay.
Which, like parallel parenting is one in which the child experiences having both their parents, but the parents don't really talk very much to each other. They run their own rules, sort of parallel, exactly what it is. They parallel parent with very little communication in between the two, and they sort of live and let live, right?
So wait, let me ask you a question. In parallel parenting, they could have different household rules. Is that what that means too?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, parallel parenting, and this is for the very extreme kind of high conflict. The whole point of it is to have the parents not have to communicate to make decisions as much together, because that's where the conflict comes in.
I see. Okay.
So in that structure, there are actually, the court documents and parenting plans that actually support having parents have more control of the decision making while the child's spending the time with them, so that there is less requirement to communicate and come to an agreement upon what's going to be moving forward for the child.
Okay.
So that's parallel parenting. But parallel parenting is more of a form of how you co-parent. So it's like a sub niche under.
Yeah.
So you're still co-parenting, right? Then there's just kind of your normal co-parenting. So none of these have to do with how much time your child is spending with either parent. It's just
the type.
And there's your co-parenting where your document tells you how much you communicate, and then you have a lot of choice. The two parents have a lot of choice of how they're going to interact with each other.
Okay.
Right? So that's basically what it is. Now, what happens? A kid is so divorce in and of itself is not an event that's going to ruin a child. I mean, if we think about it, there's lots of things. COVID could, and that whole situation where kids locked in the house is another big event. And how the parents handle walking through and show and model for their children of how they walk through and this experience will be how the children actually respond and learn from it.
That's very logical. I appreciate that. The divorce will not ruin them.
It will not ruin them. Yeah. I mean, so everybody has everything. It's really what ends up happening in divorce is if the parents themselves cannot work on healing themselves and do not model healthy behaviors for how you cope with a not so fun experience and how you walk through it to the other side.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the impact to the children around divorce ends up coming in. And so I coined that, calling the word divorce abuse. Mm-hmm. And so if you talk about divorce abuse, I say it's fundamentally when a child is not free to love and be loved by both of their parents. So feel the love from both of their parents and be freely able to show love on their own. And this even applies, I mean, let's use my own situation, right? My mom was worried that my dad was an alcoholic, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, so you might have fears about the other parent and but that's up to me to choose how I'm going to love my father in whatever way I'm going to. That's not up for my parent to put a fear within me of how I'm going to love my father. Mm-hmm. So that's what I mean by freely being able to love. That's my choice.
That makes sense. And I guess in those cases where it could be like, physically a concern for a parent to, have them with the other parent, how can someone then begin to set up boundaries? Because I feel like, your dad potentially having been an alcoholic is a very, your mom may not want him to take you guys on a drive or somewhere, you know what I mean? How can someone set up safety boundaries without, putting a damper on the love that a child can freely feel for their, their other parent?
I'm going to first talk about the ways that divorce abuse kind of shows up to model some of this behavior first, and then I'll answer that, because yes, there are safety concerns in some cases, and those are not to be taken lightly.
Yeah.
However, in many cases, in the healing of a divorce, it's exactly what I just talked about in the beginning about my mother. She had her own fears and projection about and mistrust, and she was creating stories about how my father was still coming back to her house and sneaking in her house and doing these awful things. Right? That's her story in her head.
Okay.
So there's a level of truth and reality for a true safety. And then there's a lot of our past experiences with our once loved one spouse.
Yes.
That we tend to not keep separate from our children. Mm-hmm. So let me talk about the divorce abuse kind of main ideas so that we start there, and then I can talk about the safety. So one that I think most people would know about, if we're talking about how this impacts the children, is when the children observe parental conflict right in front of them, right? And so it's okay to have an argument. You're going to have an argument. In the world, we have an argument. Right? Mm-hmm. But can you have a disagreement in a healthy manner, right? And the open conflict comes when the parents are having an open conflict that has to do with something about the child.
Yeah.
So if you're having a discussion about you disagree on politics and you can have a rational conversation about that, that's fine. Mm-hmm. But when a child is experiencing one or the other parent, and one parent can choose to disengage and not converse back. But if the other one is saying, you didn't give me my money this month, or where's my sweatshirt, where's the kids' things, or why are you late, or, oh my gosh, I've had to change my whole day because you forgot about this schedule, any of those things with the child present, that's that open conflict. And that really does impact the manner in which a child start to go inward. It makes them feel uncomfortable. Imagine if you were observing two adults, even if one side was the only side engaging, it would make you feel like you would want to shrink. Mm-hmm. So that's where it starts happening with, the children. So it's open conflict and then negative talk. So the negative talk is not necessarily, I gave examples that are more open conflict in this last. Negative talk would be your parent it directly, not to the other parent, but to the child. Like just complaining. Why is your in your own space with your child, right? I don't understand. We don't have enough money because of X, Y, and Z, or if they only did this, right? So that's sort of the next level. That's not the confliction between the parents that a child starts to feel and absorb. The next is when the extended family and friends start to also rally around and pick sides almost or engage in.
Yes,
so,
that's very damaging. Oh.
Very. So now you start feeling the extended, whatever that extended family and friends, and the child's around when you and your best friend are speaking about the things that, you know, you're really about, right?
Yeah.
Or the kid's playing in the park and you're talking, but guess what? Your child can still hear you when you're talking about, it's okay to vent, just not when your child's around, right?
Yeah.
And being very careful that your friends and support system understand that they're helping you and it's not something that the child should ever hear in any way, shape, or form.
Exactly.
Right? So that's the third thing. The fourth thing is the silent treatment. So this is very interesting because kids, again, it's the word do as you say, do what I say, but not as I do is very, very important. So kids take on about 95% of our body language and actions and only 5% of our words. So
interesting.
You know,
wow.
Yes. So just think about it. If, you know, something happens and I'm the parent and I get a message or I get my text and I see something and all of a sudden I go quiet, because there's something going on with me and my child tries to engage me and I'm distracted and or feeling that my child had some way involved, so I just kind of shut down and never say, the child feels that. So now what are they doing? Now we're withholding love almost by giving them the silent treatment. And so now they feel it. So now they want to pull more towards us and get our love. What does that mean? We've now created this boundary with our children, which is, oh, my mom, since I'm a mom, you know, oh, my mom needs me more. So now we've actually put them in a place where they're choosing a little bit to not in that silent treatment, right? It ends up being needed. The next kind of three are you can put together, but it's using your kids as a messenger, right? Which we know what that is. Yeah. You don't want to talk to your parents, so it's like, the next time you go see your father, make sure to tell him that you better bring back all the sweatshirts and clothes, right? Or make sure to tell your father that he hasn't paid me yet. Or make sure, right? And so the child has to go back and forth that way. Yeah. And so that's using them as a, and then the loyalty bond really starts to play in to that many times when it's being the silent treatment, but it can then also be in that victim role, like I told you. So in my strength with my mom in particular, when she brought on that space and wanted me, she needed me because she hadn't healed to feel sorry for her, right?
Yeah.
So actually myself and my sister handled our divorce, you know, experience very differently. And I basically left, rejected both. I'm not having it. Don't either of you give me your guilt trip or your victim state, because nope, that's your problem, not mine. And I kind of put a big hand up, right?
Yeah.
And my sister sat back and felt that she needed to save both of them. That's the loyalty bond, that she got stuck in there a victim. So in her life, in different ways, she felt like she had to parent both of my parents. That's that loyalty bond. And then the last one, which I think everybody sort of knows about as the one that you don't do, potentially, is interrogating your children. So that is It's very hard. You don't always get to spend time when you're divorced with your children. They get to have time that is with the other parent. And as a parent, when they come back, it's difficult. You want to know about their life, just like if they went to a friend's house.
Yeah.
But it can start to look like you're trying to learn everything out about their life in the other house.
Yeah.
So interrogating your child is you overall in that you want the feeling of just, I'm glad you had a really great time. What is it that you wanted to share with me? Is there anything that you'd like to take? That's the connection. But any more than that becomes almost your child feeling as though they become a spy on the other side.
Yes, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Oh, that's really good.
So those are the ways that children get caught in the middle. Those are the ways that start breaking down their ability to love and be loved by both parents, that start impacting them in a way where we then say we're not teaching them how to walk through this event called divorce in a healthy manner.
Yeah.
So that's when it starts impacting them from a childhood.
That's really good. I'm curious about this loyalty bond piece of some of the ways that a child could be affected. How can that or can that show up and manifest into their future relationships as far as like maybe staying longer than maybe they should, or I don't know, what are some ways that maybe that can affect them in their future relationships?
It's going to impact them a lot. So this is when they're children and they start to build that loyalty bind about relationship, that will end up being usually with one parent or another. And so it'll end up feeling like, I got to help this parent. I have to be this person. And then role reversal, right? Now they become the parent. So now what does that mean? This is how they're growing up and learning that what you're supposed to do. So who do they find? They're going to end up finding someone that is very similar to that parent that they had this bond with that was an unhealthy relationship. Yeah. So they will then because like I had said, it's they're looking to repeat it. It will become familiar with them. So this is where becoming and really searching on yourself of your childhood and how your relationship with both your parents. Where are you feeling guilt? Do you always feel like you're pulled into the guilt or everything, or that you need to save or help the other parent? Or those are very interesting things, because really children are learning in their younger years. That's when we as parents should be giving to them always, and they should be able to be and helping them learn how to grow in their childhood development and providing them the skills and tools, not the other way around.
Wow, that's really good. That's really good. Oh my goodness. Yeah, there's so many like little things that if you're not aware of, you can really cause some strain for your children in the future. Now, I'm curious. I want to go back to that question that I'd asked you earlier about that real safety concern. And I like that you mentioned the perception of a concern versus there actually being a real concern. But let's say in the instance that there is a real concern, how can someone, again, still foster a healthy relationship and foster actually just a relationship period between, the child and their other parent without, putting that child at risk?
Okay, I'm going to do twice again because it's a really touchy subject. So I mentioned at the beginning when I said my why, Department of Child Services, which in California is, sort of, it's named across the state something different, was called to investigate my household 5 times. And I have 2 boys. Yeah. And we have lots of land and property. And so while my parenting style, I grew up kind of in the country and learned things when I grew up, and their father's parenting styles were very different. Yeah. I I had different parenting beliefs about safety, right? I believed that they needed to run and learn how to fall in the dirt, and it's okay to have a skin knee, to simplify it.
Mm-hmm.
He did not. He grew up in the country, in the city. So I bring this up because 4 of the 5 calls were around safety. He had a concern that I was not being safe enough with my kids in my time. Every time they came up, the social worker said, nope, this is totally appropriate for you. And everything went away, right? And, but that made his fears grow even more. He believed a story, and it grew and grew and grew. So his last, and this is why I touch on it very delicately. The last one was this divorce abuse, where because he believed it, he started providing that to the kids in their household of it's not safe. So they would come back and have, be a little delicate for a minute until we're like, it's all okay, don't worry, this is all fine. And then they would go back. So I could see it in them. Mm-hmm. I could see them coming back timid, concerned. And the last time, and at this point, my children had been seeing a child therapist for over 2 years to help them with staying out of the middle. But the last time was, I was falsely accused of sexually abusing both my boys. So why I'm touching on this very, delicately is because that story in your mind of what you think versus if it is can be very different. So what I would answer to your question is, number one, if you're divorcing and there's serious safety concerns for you or already, and that's one of the reasons that you're divorcing, then the attorneys are already going to have that built in. And there will be that consideration during the divorce process that includes how the kids are based on that history, I would say. So if there's a serious thing there, the next, I would say that if there's real concern about something going on, then you would call the Department of Child Services to have them look into it if it's not already set up in your document. And that would be the next level that I would suggest. And then the final level would be, using the court system to basically say, these are my concerns of why. And then the court systems get into play about how you can or not, and the reasons why, maybe you don't feel that it's safe for your child to be in this situation, right? So back to your question, if it's truly a safety issue, you're not having really that kind of conversation with the other parent. That's more on the high conflict, and there's a lot more support going on.
Okay, good.
That level. Otherwise, I would imagine that you might, if you're in a co-parenting relationship, you might be having conversations to test the waters with your other parent. Like, hey, are you interested in learning about our routine and our schedule for bedtime and everything? And are you interested in aligning on that, right? And see how that goes.
That's really good. First of all, I'm a little disgusted that you went through that. Like, I have no words for that.
It's becoming more and more common, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And that is why I didn't answer it the first time, because without describing, because it takes time. This is what happens when parents have not healed from the emotional wounds of divorce. And let's just start here. Divorce, it's the same grieving cycle that as if you lost a loved one to death, right? It is the same steps. It's absolutely the same. The difference is that person is still living.
I know. It sounds so morbid. I've said that before, and I'm like, what do you do? They're still alive. Like, it doesn't.
So you can't trick your brain in that. And so it messes you up. And so then when you have kids, not only can you, when you've divorced,
Mhm.
now you gotta, usually you're still interacting with that person. So
Yeah.
not are they only not dead and you're trying to go through these grieving processes, they're alive and you're still talking to them.
You know what?
And
Yeah, that's
it's
true.
really hard.
That's true. And you know what? You made me think of something when you said that, because oftentimes people don't realize that people get very angry sometimes when grief is around because you're mad at the person for dying. And I know some people feel like that sounds selfish, but that's a very real feeling when it comes to grief and death. But I always thought about divorce as grieving, right? But I never, I guess, connected the anger piece to the grieving process when it comes to divorce. That's very interesting. That's a good connection there, Janet.
Well, the circle really is, you start out with, and it might go more in a circle when somebody's actually died, because you can kind of walk through the stages a little more linearly in the wheel. So it's denial. First you want to deny,
Mm-hmm.
right, that this happened, this can't be happening. Then it's anger, right?
Yeah.
Rage and anger. Why did this have to happen to me?
Mm-hmm.
And then it's negotiating with yourself. Okay, if I just do this, then what? If I do, then you sits in, and that's kind of where depression and sadness will kind of come back in, and that's where that finally will come out. And then you go to acceptance, and that's sort of the final healing. So that's your grief. That is the grief cycle of death. Now, how does that work in divorce? It doesn't go like that.
It doesn't.
And if you were working with an attorney and you're doing this, you can go from denial to rage to sadness to acceptance. I have a presentation. That's why I'm doing my hands like this. I
know.
have a presentation where all of those stages, I actually shift, instead of a circle, into what looks like gears on like a wheel, how they're interconnecting.
Yeah.
Because the person's still alive. So I might be in this gear of denial, and then my partner that I'm divorcing is in rage. So it's now connected and twist me into rage. And then it just
That is so good. I can see that. Yeah, I can see the picture, the image of it, because, we're not always in the same stages as our former partner when we're in the divorce process. And that's what can keep us there so much longer. Wow. And all the rage and,
all of it. And so if we divorce without children and we can finally uncouple and separate our businesses, so we've got them separate and we can kind of start moving on with our lives, well, at least in that place, we might be going through our emotional grief cycle of divorce a little more independently.
Yes.
What happens and how kids get so caught in the middle is when the parents don't have space to each individually go through those cycles on their own, that is separate from their children, right? And by the way, all children of divorce have a grieving cycle too. They just lost their family.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same thing. So they have their own grieving cycle. And so it gets more and more impacted. The children become more and more impacted the more enmeshed all those grieving cycles are with each other.
So I don't even know where you would start on that, but I guess, what would you recommend for someone to be able to figure out how to allow, right, for the opportunity to grieve, especially for the child, right?
Yeah, it's really hard. I think step one is owning yourself and understanding it's okay. Not putting any time frame on anything, but understanding it's okay that you're sad. It's okay that just recognizing there is a cycle and you are not going to go through it at any time or speed, and be okay with that, right? I think that's really, really important to understand of yourself. And once you understand that, then start helping on your own when your child isn't with you to really do some internal work to identify where maybe you are and the pieces that you need to start working on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you really are not going to be able to do anything. This is a huge problem for divorced couples with kids.
Mm-hmm.
They built a unspoken parenting belief system when they were married. Mm-hmm. This is who we are. And when they uncouple, they forget that just because they have kids, it doesn't mean they can try to control the other person's behavior.
Yes.
Even though they have children together, and that's where it starts to really butt heads. So you are not going to be able to help the other person in their healing cycle. Mm-hmm. So accepting that you are not going to be a part of that. And if you are receiving, because many people receive rage from the other side and receive it as you're the problem, you're the reason for this, it's all your fault. Understanding for yourself that you can't control that person.
No. Getting
okay with what you did and what you're accountable and getting okay with that for yourself is one thing. Don't absorb that other person's energy. They need to do it. Mm-hmm. So figuring out tools to be able to not accept it's all your fault, because it takes two to tango. It's never one person's fault. Not ever.
No, it's not.
And so if you are receiving the rage, particularly, like the denial, you usually won't hear from the other person, right? It's particularly the rage or maybe sadness that you might have as an input from the other parent, that understanding that that's them and putting it in a bucket so that you don't feed off of it and react to it is super important. And again, I'll bring you back to your kid. Your children are healthy and fine if you role model how you navigate problems and get out of them. So even if they see this and you are able to rationally understand and show them how to navigate through a very difficult situation, that you will be modeling how they too can walk through and come out on the other side.
That makes sense. It almost sounds like needing to get some divorce mediation before, like really announcing to the children and before really moving forward to kind of like set your mind straight on the goal, which is to keep the family dynamic, meaning the child still happy, healthy, but able to grieve the loss of the family still. And so it's tough, but it's necessary. It's absolutely necessary.
It's necessary. And then how do you help your child? I mean, so if you are in that relationship that is, where you can collaborate and come to just compromise and decisions, yes, you might actually sit down, the two parents, and say, okay, we'd like to tell our children together. What will we say? Short and brief. This is what's going to happen. Here's how it's going to be. You're fine. You're safe. It's just two different houses. We both love you very much. We just think, it is healthier for you if we are living in two different households. And you sit down together and talk to the children, the kid or children about that. But the children are not worse off if you are not able to do that as a couple. Yeah. And it is, again, just fine if you on your own have a conversation with your child. And remember, children are they're little people. They're not stupid. They have all of our emotions just like everybody else. So they're just small people that don't maybe have all the tools or words to communicate what they're feeling, but they feel as much as we do. So explaining to them, your dad and I have decided to get divorced because we are struggling to communicate effectively, and we want you to see healthy communication and compromise. So in that, you will have time with your father, and he will have a place. You will have time with me, and this is where we'll be, and we will get through this, and we both love you.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah.
Simple.
Yeah. Well, Janet, I really appreciate your time today. And for everybody that, tuned in, I hope that if nothing else, you understood yourself today, through maybe something that happened in your childhood that you might need to go check in on for yourself and evaluate some of your relationships. If you have children and you're on this call today, that you can now look at your behavior objectively, look at your partner's behavior objectively, and make a way forward for your children, and for their health and their happiness and their sanity, right? So I just want to say thank you again for being on today, and I can't wait for this to air.
Oh, thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure speaking to you, and I'm glad to be able to speak to, your community about these things, because I'm so passionate about helping the children grow up to be healthy, emotional adults.
Absolutely. Thank you, Janet.